Hello, folks, and welcome back to Chris Wyatt Reports news out of South Africa, where today, October 11th, 2024, the Director of Public Prosecutions in Limpopo Province, Advocate Mukali Ivy Tenga, took the decision not to prosecute anyone in relation to the Phala Phala scandal. This, according to National Prosecuting Authority statement. Now, folks, 2 years after this unsavory story of a corruption-accused president emerged, the African National Congress is now trying to finally push the matter to the broom closet.
Welcome back once again. This is Chris Report, and he assured me that since Simon's down in Boulders, folks, this is Chris Wyatt reporting from South Africa.
Now, how do we get here? In June of 2022, Arthur Frazier, the former Director General of the State Security Agency, opened a kidnapping and money laundering case against Cyril Ramaphosa, the Presidential Protection Unit head Major General Wally Ruda, and crime intelligence members for allegedly concealing a burglary at Ramaphosa's Phala Phala farm in February of 2020. Bear in mind, folks, that's 4.5 years ago. Now, you guys remember Wally Ruda, no? That's the clown who tried to smuggle heavy weapons into Poland for Ramaphosa's ludicrous peace mission to Russia, and then called Polish officials racist for not letting armed and undeclared security personnel with heavy weapons into Poland. Yeah, the race hustler himself. Now, isn't it funny how the ANC is so very fond of crying over their own sovereignty, but denies the same of other sovereign nations? The National Prosecuting Authority said yesterday the decision not to prosecute was taken by the DPP after a careful assessment of all available evidence presented to the prosecutors by the DPCI. Now, she concluded that there was no reasonable prospect of a successful prosecution based on evidence contained in the docket. Of this, I have no doubt. Of course, there was no reasonable prospects. They cannot even conduct a trial of Jacob Zuma, let alone conviction of Jacob Zuma over a nearly 3-decade-old corruption case where his guilt has already clearly been established in a court of law by Judge Hilary Squires. Or have we forgotten that? How in the world will they get a conviction from a kleptocratic government that owns the levers of justice? Impossible. But that does not mean you just give up. You prosecute Ramaphosa. He's not special, nor should he be privileged. The DPP made her decision in line with the prosecution policy of the NPA, which states that a prosecutor, in deciding whether to institute criminal proceedings against an accused person, must assess whether there is sufficient and admissible evidence to provide a reasonable prospect of a successful prosecution. Well, that's all true. So, few questions for the DPP. First, so you're telling me that you have the currency import documents that Ramaphosa or Palapala filed prior to illegally importing 580,000 US dollars into South Africa? Not rand worth 580,000, 580,000 US dollars. Who's ever seen that kind of cash in their hand? I've never seen it in my hand. Despite the fact I ran a $3 billion program, I've never touched $580,000. Are you telling us you have the receipt for the income taxes and or import fees that Ramaphosa paid for that money, or the receipt from the Phala Phala game branch for the money as income? So when did this Sudanese businessman take back the $580,000? Since the cattle were never delivered, he must have gotten his money back. Or did he? And when did that occur? Now, are you also claiming that you have no evidence that the Presidential Protection Detail perverted the means of justice, devoting resources to hunting down the missing money on behalf of Ramaphosa in a private matter unrelated to his official duties beyond the scope of their job? And one of the Namibian police officials who have made statements that they refused to cooperate with Ramaphosa's detail because the request was extra legal. No crimes were committed there. Were you unable to uncover any evidence the accused thieves were tortured? And finally, do you not even have any recommendation for the disciplinary action or criminal charge against the South African Police Service and its VIP protection services for lying in their annual report that not a single one of the 40-plus VIP protected residents in South Africa that it covered in that fiscal year had even a single incident, when there was, now we're being told, a break-in in 2020 and $580,000 stolen from the Phala Phala property, which is protected by the VIP protection services. Yet in the fiscal report for that year, they and SAPS lied, saying there was no incident there. At a minimum, there should be some sort of disciplinary hearing, if not criminal charges. Now, the latest development came as the economic freedom fighters were looking to use the courts to revive an impeachment motion, which the ANC, then with a solid majority in the National Assembly, had previously shot down. The public protector and the South African Reserve Bank also cleared Ramaphosa in separate investigations. I'm sorry, Propaganda 24. That is simply not factually true. Actually, it's simply not the case. The public protector and the Reserve Bank did not clear him. Let's delve into that. The public protector comically cleared Ramaphosa of any ethics violations as a member of parliament. And the captured ANC propaganda wing, also known as the South African media, either too dumb or complicit in the cover-up, falsely reported that the public protector or prosecutor had cleared him of any criminal conduct. Ethical and criminal are two very different standards, folks. He was cleared of ethics violations, and that in itself is a joke, but not of criminal charges by the public protector. Now, the Reserve Bank is a whole other matter of covering things up. The South African Reserve Bank found that President Cyril Ramaphosa's Ntaba Nyoni estate, which owns Phala Phala Game Farm, was not legally entitled to the $580,000 it received from Sudanese businessman Hassim Mustafa for 20 buffalo. Not legally entitled to. That kind of sounds criminal, no? If he was not entitled to it, why was Cyril Ramaphosa in possession of $580,000 stuffed in couches and mattresses long after the money was delivered to him by these so-called Sudanese businessmen? Ask yourself that. Now, the Reserve Bank said because the transaction was not perfected, in other words, they didn't get away with it, Mustafa never received delivery of the buffalo. There was no legal obligation on Ramaphosa or Ntaba Nyoni to declare the foreign currency under exchange control regulations. Actually, that's false. If I rock up in Joburg, Cape Town, with $580,000 in my briefcase, there is an obligation to report that under currency exchange control regulations. This is simply garbage. The South African Reserve Bank is complicit in the criminal activity of Ramaphosa with this decision. How else can someone else decide what's going on here? And of course, he never received delivery. Hassim Mustafa never bought any cattle. You see, Ramaphosa got caught when Arthur Fraser turned him in and then simply fabricated this story, which the ANC-controlled Reserve Bank then used to invent an excuse to squelch the investigation. Now, folks, all of this, of course, begs the most obvious of questions. If there's no criminal activity here on the part of Ramaphosa and Palapala and Mr. Hassim, if Mr. Hassim Mustafa, if nobody did anything wrong, why wasn't there simply an electronic funds transfer instead of the cash? Why don't you just wire the money? A bank transfer? Well, folks, the answer is quite simple. A political party comprised of entitled kleptocrats loves cash. Their inferiority complex, crafted during their liberation struggle, makes them crave seeing and touching piles of money. They've just got to have that tactile feel. And naturally, cash is the best way to avoid a paper trail for forensic audits. And why avoid a paper trail unless you're committing a crime? And now the ANC is demanding a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Naturally, where else would such corrupt governments hang out but at the United Nations? What say you, folks? Innocent or guilty? The ANC made it all go away. And the media bought it hook, line, and sinker. Why? Because they're either too dumb or they're part of the whole process. Cheers.